Perhaps we should, there was a question here, and then Mike, yes. Right here, thanks. On the table here.
Yeah, the question of the role of animal sacrifices as making atonement is a very complicated question, it seems to me, and one that in your treatment of it, Professor Hare, involves rather symbolic level of thought. I wonder, though, if you could comment on what I think would strike any anthropologist as a rather more mundane observation that is relevant to the role of animal sacrifice in ancient Israel. I think any anthropologist would note the following functionally important facts. Number one, the Levites are not given any land in the Promised Land, and therefore are unable to provide their own foodstuffs. Secondly, the Levites were the ones who received the tithe and consumed it. And thirdly, functionally speaking, it seems pretty clear, I think, that the Levites were constituted the civil service in Israel. Why shouldn't we think of the sacrificial system as income tax?
Yeah, I don't have any objection to thinking this was God's provision for a caste of people who didn't have animals of their own. But I don't see that to be incompatible with anything else that I've said. So it had that, the sacrifice system had indeed that social function. The priests ate some of the sacrifices. They didn't eat the burnt sacrifices, but they ate the peace offerings and so on. And that was a provision for people who didn't have animals of their own.
Maybe that can inform the discussion about
Okay, Mike?
This is a question for Professor Crenshaw. The three earlier papers in this conference argue that God as represented in the Old Testament is not good. Therefore, we can't take the Old Testament as divinely revealed. The God as represented in the Old Testament isn't worthy of worship. I take it they would say that religion founded on the Old Testament is bogus for that reason, if not for all manner of other reasons. You seem clearly to agree at least with the first point, right? That God as represented in the Old Testament is not good. I wonder if you'd just comment on the extent of your agreement with those first three papers.
Well, it's obvious from what I said that I view the Old Testament as human construction. Therefore, I think that not only do I say that, but it is something, the myths, the teachings in the Old Testament they were taught to me when I was a child, and it is virtually impossible for me to get away from them. So there is much in the Hebrew Bible that inspires me. As I read the texts, I compare them to ancient Near Eastern struggles to understand what it is to be human, what it is to be religious, to be grateful for my human existence. I find in the Hebrew Bible much that appeals to me, but maybe it's because of what I was taught as a child. I struggle with the belief in a God because the more I study, the more I see the atrocities that occur in the name of God, and the more I see about the whole problem of natural evil and how anyone can believe in the existence of God in the presence of these kinds of catastrophic events. I struggle with that. And so I have, on the one hand, the appeal to believe, and on the other hand, the difficulty of doing so. And my interpretation of the Hebrew Bible for 45 years has been the attempt to reconcile those two perspectives, and I've been unable to do it, I have to admit. So, of course, I concur with much of what was said in the earlier papers. But deep down, I still want to hang on to theism, and that's where I am. And it's a tension that I simply cannot reconcile.
Up in the front here, Nick.
John, this one is for you. Evaluative transfer. I don't understand that very well yet. Fact is, I don't understand it at all. It went past very fast here, the evaluative transfer in these sacrifices, and it struck me that the word you used to sort of elucidate it was ransom. Now, I don't see that paying a ransom to somebody or for something out of a pawn shop, or paying a ransom to get somebody out of jail, or out of, not a hostage or something like that. It's not clear to me that that's got much of anything to do with with evaluative transfer. So here's an invitation for you to say more about that. As I say, it went whoosh in your paper.
Yeah. So I agree that the notion of ransom doesn't by itself bring in evaluative transfer. But in this context, we've got a subject paying the ransom, the animal, paying the ransom, who didn't cause the offense. So we've got a kind of substitution here. Well, no, you could ransom. I guess you could provide your own ransom, but very often it's somebody else. So there's nothing in the notion of ransom that I think requires a evaluative transfer. But if there's a substitution going on, if one person or one subject is being punished instead of another, we have to ask, is that just? And the notion of evaluative transfer is supposed to help with answering that question. So the idea is supposed to be, an animal can represent me because the animal is part of my household.
Okay,
So the idea is that a member of my household is paying the penalty on my behalf, which is, I mean, ransom is a sort of throwaway. A member of my household is paying the ransom on my behalf. Why does it have to be a member of my household?
Doesn't, but there has to be, for this to be intelligible, there has to be some connection between us. In this case, I'm suggesting that's what the connection is. The animal belongs to my household.
But we don't ask the animal.
We don't. The animal doesn't consent. So in this case, substitutionary punishment is not now to be justified morally. I can't see that it is justified, and I said that.
okay, in the back here.
The story of Abraham being asked to sacrifice Isaac poses a problem. And it seems to me that thinking of these sacrificial lambs as members of a household simply compounds that problem. Abraham was asked to kill his own son, and then on your view it looks like all the Israelites were asked to kill members of their own households. So in light of the Abraham-Isaac story being a problem because it's his son, how does this help? How does thinking of them as members of the household Doesn't it simply compound that problem, the one we've already seen with Abraham and Isaac?
Yeah, I think it would be equally difficult because, except that Isaac could consent and the animal doesn't. So there's that disanalogy between them. So to the extent that Isaac is a figure of Christ and Christ consents to taking that role, that's different from the animal. But that doesn't solve the problem about the binding of Isaac. And I mean, I have extensive views on that, but I don't know that I should really get into it. There's a problem about how God could command the killing of an innocent human being. I suppose, just in a sentence, what I think is Abraham was commended for devotion. Abraham thought that to be devoted to God meant sacrificing his son. God said, okay, go ahead with that. But in the process of going ahead with that, Abraham came to see that was wrong. And God replaced human sacrifice with the sacrifice of an animal.